welcome back to the Madness and Grace podcast. Today it's just me and Matt. How are you doing today, Matt?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I'm excited for today's episode. It's one that I've been kind of itching to talk about as someone who deals with just general anxiety. So today's episode, we're going to be talking about coping with anxiety in a stressful world and tying that back to faith as well. So
Great. Sounds good.
Sweet. You know, based on what I have observed, especially in my age demographic, for those listening, I'm mid-20s, young woman, and it just seems that people are more anxious now than they ever have been before. And Matt, I'm just curious as to why that is, in your opinion.
Well, it is true that anxiety is higher now than it has really ever been, particularly in younger individuals. Adolescent females are particularly struggling. And a lot of people, they point to the pandemic, but really we saw, increases in anxiety and real problems with psychological distress before the pandemic. The pandemic just made everything worse. So why that is happening, I think, is kind of a complex interaction of a lot of different things. I mean, we all live in a stressful world, and the world's always been stressful. It's not like that's changed.
Right.
Really, part of the problem, I think, is that people don't have the social connections that they used to have, where they were able to sit down and talk to somebody. Mm-hmm. We may have more mental health resources than we had in the past, but people don't access those mental health resources. We've talked about that before. And now we are more disconnected from one another than we really have ever been. And we have, these great kind of stressors on us. And I also think a lot of people have kind of unrealistic expectations of what it is to be successful, what it means to be happy, things like that. And so I think they struggle with that generally, and then they don't have people that they can work those things out with.
Yeah, and you said more of a disconnect from each other now. It seems like people are quick to point to maybe the overuse of social media as a big reason. We're seeing so many more mental health issues in young people. Why is social media negatively affecting us so much? And what can we do to address the problem, besides just saying, I'm just going to cut out social media?
Right.
Totally.
I think the reality is it'd be very difficult to cut off social media, depending on how you define that, because, everything from email to, true social media like TikTok or something like that. I mean, it's just part of who we are now as a society, as a culture. And, just like the telephone became part of who we are and television became part of who we are and things like that. So, I would say that undoubtedly social media, there are some negative aspects to it, just this virtual world in a sense, I would say. But it isn't the only thing that's causing the problem. It's contributing to the issue. And if you look at adolescents, for instance, that are struggling with depression or anxiety issues, you will find that they do use social media at much higher rates than those who aren't. And so then you have to ask yourself, well, is the social media causing that problem, or is it that people that have these problems are more drawn to social media?
Yeah.
And so, if you're more isolated at home because you have depression and you're not connecting with people relationally, well, it does give you an outlet, So I don't think it's kind of a chicken and the egg thing. I don't think it's really that easy to answer. But I would say is this: what social media does is it disconnects us rather than connects us, and we believe that it connects us. We all, especially young people, think that I'm more connected than I've ever been. Mm-hmm. I can reach out in a moment and connect with someone. Well, you can, but you can't get the emotional connection, and it's very difficult to read the emotions of a text. And things like that. And the other problem, so really you're more disconnected. In my day, I'm an old guy. In my day, we called people on the telephone.
Yeah.
We had to talk on a landline telephone. Well, at least you could hear them, And so now people don't even call. And then before that, you had to go. I mean, the other thing is, my wife and I, when we were away from one another during the summer from college, we would write letters to each other. So, I mean, even that was, you're not there talking, but now we're certainly not there talking. And I think another part of it is it gives us a false sense of the intimacy or connection we do have.
Right.
You say, oh, I've got, this many thousands of friends. Well, no, you don't really, and those aren't really friends. And then the other problem is comparison.
Yeah.
And something like Instagram or even Snapchat and TikTok, they basically are driven by comparison. You see someone else doing something, and you want to do it or be like them, or and we've always had that to some extent, but now it's like you can't get away from it. So you're never happy with, they say that, the old quote is that, comparison is the thief of joy. And it absolutely is. I mean, you have to realize if a person took the picture 30 times and used a bunch of filters to make sure it looks just right, you're not even comparing it with a legitimate picture, but that's particularly damaged for adolescent females.
Yeah.
And so, there's some real negatives with it. I think, for a parent, what I would say is you need to engage your children. You need to make sure you're having conversations with them in person. You need to make sure that you don't tell them to stop using social media, but have periods of time where they don't use social media, and you're getting them to engage you or to engage friends or go out of the house. I mean, be a parent, I think, is the most important thing. Your child is always going to kind of sink down to the lowest common denominator. They're going to do what their friends are doing, and that may not be the healthiest thing.
Right. And what you say about comparison is so true. And even if it's not, some photoshopped model photo, if you're constantly seeing people post, well, I'm out to dinner, I'm having fun, I'm on vacation, and you're like, well, all I did this week was work. I didn't do anything fun. I feel like I need to go out and do something just to prove to everyone that I have a quote unquote happy life.
Right.
And that can become really toxic. Then you start doing stuff for the approval of other people that you don't even know instead of for yourself. And that's a trap that now I'd say I don't fall into that as much, but definitely can be a real issue.
Absolutely. I think, in the past, when you look at a magazine, you think, oh, well, that's a magazine. It's not real. But when you're, quote unquote, following a person on Twitter or following a person, a famous person on Instagram, you get the false sense that somehow you're looking into their real life.
Right.
And you just don't realize that even with an Instagram influencer, these aren't real. These are faked.
Right.
And they're portraying an image that is not real. It is not their life. They do not live the way that they are describing this. And I literally a couple weeks ago saw a guy has the kind of a mock-up of the inside of a private jet that he rents out to people. And then and it's mostly Instagram influencers, and they take pictures of themselves inside of this, and then they post that, oh, I'm on my way to Dubai, or I'm on my way here or there, and it's completely phony. It's in a warehouse. It's not even real. And so I think that's part of the problem is I think we're not helping our kids, particularly our young people, understand, the most important thing is not having a bunch of money or having a bunch of supposed fans. To be famous, in my opinion, and I'm an old guy, you have to have done something worth being famous for. You discovered something, or you're an incredible athlete, or you did something that other people can't do. That's fame. And fame's okay, I guess, but it's more important to be happy. It's more important to be a good person.
Right.
And I think that's the kind of thing parents need to be teaching their young people, so that when they do see that, they're like, hey, you know what? I'm happy with my life, and I'm a good person, so I'm good.
And realizing that without needing the validation from all these people on the internet.
Absolutely, and I think that's a place where the church could step in too, and really say, your value is in how God sees you, not in how others see you.
Well, that segue is great. And to my next point, I found this quote on the American Association of Christian Counselors website, and it's kind of a lengthy quote, but I want to read all of it. It says, "Anxiety for a Christian can be misunderstood as simply not having enough faith. The judgment leveled against oneself in regard to deficiency of faith reflects a type of negative thinking and coping that permeates one's conceptualization of God. It may sound like this: I lack the faith to believe, and I worry instead of believing. This perspective reveals the belief that God has essentially become non-performing because the individual does not have enough faith. The misconception is that God is dependent upon our faith to act. Since God is sovereign and self-determining, he invites us to have faith to believe, but does not require this faith to act on our behalf." I feel like maybe some believers may disagree with that statement, but I find it quite comforting as a Christian who also struggles with anxiety. But do you have any further advice for those who may be feeling guilty for having anxiety as a Christian?
Yeah, it's not uncommon, for us as we work with different faith communities or with Christians to run across people that think anxiety is a sin.
Yeah.
They might quote the verse that says, be anxious for nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem with that is that, that's not really talking about an anxiety disorder. It's not really talking about mental health in any sense. That's a verse that's talking about, when you are concerned about something, when you're worrying about something, you need to bring that before the Lord.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things people need to understand to begin with is that anxiety is normal. Mm-hmm. Everybody has anxiety. Anxiety is a God-given emotion. Mm-hmm. You have a system in your brain that assesses threat around you. When it senses threat, either rightly or wrongly, you have a stress response. So you have a fight or flight response. Yeah. And that's what we call, it's fear. It's what we call anxiety. So, if you have a test coming up and you're anxious about not doing well on that test, which is normal, it motivates you to study more.
Yeah.
Okay. If a tiger comes walking in the room, you have a stress response and you're like, I probably need to get away from this, or I'm going to die. Those are normal. And I could inject you with epinephrine. I could put an electrode down in your brain and stimulate certain areas, and you would have an anxiety response, and you'd be completely no control over it whatsoever. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the first thing we have to understand. It's normal.
Yeah.
Anxiety is normal. Now, what happens with someone who has an anxiety disorder is that system is running amok. It's out of control, and it has to be controlled. That system is picking up threat when there's no threat.
Yeah.
So that could be done through therapy. That could be done through pharmaceutical means. There are a lot of ways to treat somebody. And then in between, there's worrying and there's fear and there's different stuff like that. And again, all normal. It doesn't do a person any good, obviously, to sit around and worry about stuff all the time, because worrying about stuff doesn't. If worrying isn't motivating you to action, then it's not healthy worrying. Mm-hmm. Worrying should motivate you to action, to change whatever it is that you're worried about. Yeah. And so, like with the test is coming up, I'm worried about it. Well, I should study more, overstudy, and then I won't be as concerned because I'll do well. And I do think that, unfortunately, people of faith, they have a tendency to kind of dismiss a lot of these things. And I agree with that. Mm-hmm. With that quote, I certainly don't think in any way God needs our faith to act. I mean, God's will is done, period, because it's God's will. Mm-hmm. And if God is omniscient and omnipresent and omnipotent, and he is all controlling and all powerful, then his will is done. Mm-hmm. Regardless of what I do, I'm not going to stand in his way. If I stood in his way against his will, then somehow I should be the God then, because that's just not possible. Mm-hmm. I do believe that God allows us to cooperate with his will and be involved with it, obviously. And I think that's greatly honoring of us. And I think we can mess that up. We can decide not to do that. Mm-hmm. But I also don't think just, worrying about, if my child is ill and I'm worried that my child is ill, I don't think that shows a lack of concern or a lack of faith in God's ability to heal my child. Right. I think that's normal. Mm-hmm. And that's going to rouse me to action to get my child care. It's also going to rouse me to action to pray. Mm-hmm. And so I do think that Christians need to step back and say, anxiety is a normal emotion. It's God-given. There are benefits to it. Nowhere in the Bible is an anxiety disorder described or talked about as far as saying that's a bad thing. So that's an extreme. And it's easy for somebody who doesn't have a difficult situation or isn't worrying about something to say to somebody else, well, you just need to believe God for that. I think anxiety can rouse us to greater belief. So I think we need to be really careful. We're quick to be judgy and oftentimes not quick to be gracious. And I think Jesus was more gracious than he was judgy most of the time.
I agree. And, we're talking about an anxiety disorder. A disorder is something that untreated you can't help. So if you're putting this guilt on top of that, whether it be Christians or what you interpret from the Bible, it's just extra anxiety on top of the anxiety that you can't help.
Well, you're not helping anybody by doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, you just really aren't. Mm-hmm. And people with anxiety disorders who get treatment get better. Right. So, I mean, that kind of messes up that idea, it's a faith issue. Well, then they shouldn't be able to get better unless their faith gets stronger. Right. And I can tell you, I know non-believing individuals who got better from their anxiety disorders by getting treatment. So, I mean, if we really want to test that theory, now that in no way is to say that faith can't be an important part of recovery, because I believe faith is a very important part of treatment and recovery, and we use integrated care at the Hope and Healing Center. But there certainly are things that we can do for a person to help minimize some of their suffering with anxiety that really have nothing to do with faith. I think you can get a more full kind of recovery when faith is involved. But let's not make something a spiritual matter when it may affect us spiritually, but it certainly isn't generated that way.
Right. The last thing I wanted to ask you is, for someone who may be experiencing anxiety and, maybe not even someone who has an anxiety disorder, but someone who's dealing with worry, someone who might be experiencing an anxiety attack, what are some ways that an individual could self-soothe when experiencing something like that?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think that what people have to understand is, we live in a stressful world, period. And, people will say, well, you might have a doctor say to you, you need to minimize stress in your life. Well, I mean, that's...
Where do I start?
You could go live on top of a mountain by yourself and you're still going to have stress. You're going to have to go out and find your food and your shelter. And so, I mean, that's kind of ridiculous to say. Really, what's more important is how do you deal with the stress?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, as you just said or asked, how do you soothe yourself when you're in the middle? So it's about coping strategies. It's about building up resiliency. And that's an important thing for us to teach our children. So one of the first things I would say for a person to do is to determine what your primary coping strategy is. A coping strategy is a behavioral or cognitive kind of technique or skill or strategy that you use when you get stressed out or you get anxious. So think about the last 3 to 5 times you got really anxious, and what was the first thing you did afterwards? So did you go eat some ice cream? Did you go for a jog? Did you pray? Well, what is it that you did? The first thing you did to make yourself feel better, that's your primary coping strategy. And hopefully it's a positive strategy. It's not, well, I drank a bunch of alcohol.
Right.
Because that's a negative coping strategy. So I think you need to look at your coping strategies and see if they're positive, meaning that they benefit you, but they don't have their own negative consequences.
Yeah.
So make sure you have positive coping strategies. I think secondly, I think it's very important for people that have high anxiety to learn relaxation techniques or some type of relaxation related technique, be that meditation or some type of prayer or breathing techniques or progressive muscle relaxation, where they can really take control of their physiology and bring that arousal level down so that they're able to relax, particularly if they're the kind of person who deals with panic attacks and things like that. So these are all things that you can find online, but you could go to our Mental Health Gateway website, mentalhealthgateway.org. And you'll find a number of techniques there, or you could go and download our Mental Health Gateway app. And there are videos and examples there of we have a thing called Foursquare breathing or grounding techniques. And all of these are very helpful, and they're helpful to do even when you're not having an anxiety attack, just to kind of teach yourself how to relax. But the first thing is making sure that you have a set of positive coping strategies. We all have strategies. When you get stressed out, do you go shopping?
Yeah.
That's a negative coping strategy. When you get stressed out, do you exercise? That's a positive coping strategy. So, one of the easiest thing is to sit down and talk to a friend. That's very effective. And that's what we talked about earlier. A lot of people just don't have those relationships anymore. And so having that social support around you, and that's, again, why a faith community is so important, because not only does it help you connect to, God and a higher transcendence that allows you to recognize that you're not in control, but He's in control, and you can kind of let anxiety go in that context. But it gives you a built-in support system around you of people who unconditionally care for you and are there to listen and will be present with you. And so, that's what we all need. So again, I think the best thing is to learn what your coping skills are, coping strategies, make sure they're positive, and then develop some relaxation techniques. Again, there's thousands of them out there that you can use when you aren't able to just kind of bring it down by thinking about it. You can use one of those to bring down your heart rate and respiration and relax.
Trial and error. Try some out, and if one works, great.
Absolutely.
Keep it on you. If not, for me, one of the techniques that I tried out and ended up working for me, see something. What do I see? Okay. What do I hear? What do I smell? Just simple stuff like that.
It's a simple grounding technique.
Yeah. And it might not work for you, but there's so many other ones that you can try out.
A lot of times people talk about progressive muscle relaxation, which me personally, I don't find that very helpful because it takes a lot of thought and a lot of, but a lot of people love that one.
Yeah.
I prefer breathing techniques. You mentioned a grounding technique. Yeah, try different ones.
Yeah.
If it doesn't relax you, move on to something else. And so just find the ones that work best for you. But again, find your coping skills, your coping strategies. What do you do? Make sure you have supportive friends around you that you can talk to, not text, not email, talk to in person and tell about issues you're dealing with, and then have some relaxation techniques.
Okay, well, thank you, Matt. And for everyone who's listening, Matt and I are going to be recording some question and answer episodes coming up. So if you have a question that you want Matt to answer on the podcast, you can email me at contact@hhci.org. And who knows, you might just hear us discussing your question in one of our upcoming episodes. As always, I will leave all of the Hope and Healing Center information in our show notes, as well as the Mental Health Gateway app. I really love having it on my phone. It's just easy, accessible, and all those grounding tools we talked about, you can find them there. App is free. So thank you all so much for listening. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Emily.